Hey guys, tonight we wander into the humid green maze of the ancient Maya, where the trees are thick, the air feels like warm soup, and somewhere beneath your sandals the earth is quietly hiding an entire freshwater world. You are standing in the Yucatan, where the jungle hums, the cicadas whine like tiny broken violins, and every step feels like the land is keeping a secret from you. Because it is. Under this rocky, sun-baked surface, there are no grand rivers rolling by to save you, no picturesque little streams to refill your clay cup, no helpful modern gas station where you can buy an overpriced bottle of water and a regrettable snack. There is only stone, heat, and the occasional magical hole in the ground that may or may not be a doorway to the underworld. And yes, you probably won't survive this. Not because anything especially dramatic happens right away, but because if you are the sort of person who forgets their water bottle in the car now, you would be in immediate trouble here. Ancient life in the Maya lowlands is less serene jungle wisdom, and more please don't let the dry season turn me into a raisin. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, invite viewers to post their location and local time. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You move slowly through the forest, and at first it does not look like the kind of place where great cities should exist. The soil is thin in many places. The roots twist over pale limestone like knuckles. The sun above is relentless when it finds a gap in the canopy, and even the shade feels sticky. It is beautiful, yes, but also slightly judgmental. The kind of landscape that seems to say, "You brought sandals?" Bold. And yet, this is where the Maya built cities, not tiny villages with a few huts and one guy who claims he can fix roofs, but real cities. Temple pyramids, plazas, causeway, palaces, ball courts, astronomical alignments, monumental architecture rising out of the jungle like the earth itself had ambitious design plans. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Maya civilization flourished for thousands of years across what is now southern Mexico, Guatemala, Belize, and parts of Honduras and El Salvador, with major urban centers developing especially during what scholars call the Classic period, roughly 250 to 900 C. That is a very long time to be this organized in this much humidity. So how do you build a city in a place that seems to have forgotten one of the basic ingredients of city life? Water. This is the first quiet revelation of tonight's story. The Maya of the northern lowlands, especially in the Yucatan Peninsula, often had no reliable surface rivers at all. If you are imagining a city beside a broad glittering river like ancient Egypt on the Nile, or Mesopotamia by the Tigris and Euphrates, you need to gently set that image aside and replace it with a hot limestone table full of hidden underground plumbing. This is where the cenotes enter the picture. A cenote is a natural sinkhole, often formed when the limestone bedrock collapses and reveals groundwater beneath. Some are open like giant blue wells dropped into the jungle. Some are half covered by vines and roots, like nature made a dramatic curtain entrance. Some are deep and shadowy enough to make you reconsider every decision that brought you there. The word itself comes from the Yucatec Maya word Cenote, which refers to a sacred well. So right away, you are not just dealing with geology. You are dealing with survival, ritual, memory, and probably at least one uncle who insists he saw something move in the water. And this is the heartbeat of the whole journey. The Maya did not merely build near water. In many places they built around these hidden openings in the earth because without them, life would have been nearly impossible. You keep walking, and now the jungle feels different. Every rise and dip in the land begins to matter. Every patch of cracked limestone could be concealing a cavern, a water pocket, a whole underground system flowing beneath your feet in total silence. The landscape is not empty. It is layered. It is holding its breath. The strange thing is that if you flew over parts of the Yucatan today, you might still not immediately understand how much depends on what is underneath. The land above can seem dry, even stubborn. but below there is a vast network of groundwater and caves. This is one of the great quirks of the region. The Maya lived in a world where the most important resource was often invisible. Imagine organising your whole life around a hidden water source that cannot be moved, expanded, or replaced. It is like building your entire neighbourhood around the only functioning charger at an airport, except holier and with more incense. And because these cenotes were so essential, they became magnets for settlement. You can picture it now. A family group arrives in a region where there is game in the forest, usable stone underfoot, maybe decent soil nearby, and, most importantly, a cenote within reach. That one feature changes everything. It means drinking water. It means food preparation. It means cooking, washing, storage, farming support, and long-term habitation. It means that a temporary camp can become a village, and a village can, over generations, become a city. Historians still argue whether some Maya communities first chose settlement sites mainly for practical access to water, or for the sacred significance those places already held in local belief. And honestly, the answer is probably both. Humans are wonderfully consistent that way. If a place keeps you alive and feels spiritually important, congratulations, you have found real estate worth fighting over. You pause for a moment and listen. There is birdsong overhead. Something rustles in the undergrowth with the confidence of an animal that knows you are the visitor. The smell of wet leaves and stone rises in the heat. And beneath all of it is the invisible presence of water, cool and ancient, waiting in darkness below. You can almost understand why the Maya would have seen this not just as useful, but powerful. A hole in the earth that gives life in a dry landscape? That is not just a resource, that is a relationship. The cenote is never merely a hole. It is a gathering place, a lifeline, a landmark, a danger, a sacred site, a practical necessity, and eventually the quiet centre around which roads, homes, shrines and markets can grow. If you are a Maya child, you likely grow up knowing exactly where the nearest water lies, how deep it is, what stories are attached to it, and which adults become very dramatic if you go too close to the edge. Ancient parenting, as it turns out, was largely universal, and this is where the sleepy magic of the Maya world begins to unfold. Because once you understand that water is hidden, you start to understand why everything else has to adapt around that fact. Cities, ceremonies, architecture, farming, trade, even myth. The landscape itself dictates the rhythm. No river to dominate the horizon, no obvious source of abundance, just patience, memory, and the ability to read a world that keeps its essentials underground. By the time the evening shadows begin to lengthen in your imagination, you are no longer seeing the Yucatan as empty or harsh. You are beginning to see it as the Maya saw it, full of concealed openings, sacred thresholds, and possibilities waiting beneath the stone. And somewhere ahead, just beyond the trees, the first dark blue mouth of a cenote is waiting for you. By now you are close enough to the cenote to feel the air change before you even see it. The jungle heat still hangs over your shoulders like a damp wool blanket nobody asked for, but ahead there is a slight coolness, a hush. A pocket of shadow where the earth seems to exhale. You part a curtain of vines and there it is, a deep circle of water sunk into stone, dark blue at the centre, green at the edges, and so still it looks less like a pond and more like the planet forgot to finish a sentence. You stand there for a moment, clay jar hypothetically in hand, trying to process the fact that this entire civilization has built its life around what appears to be nature's most elegant plumbing accident. And that is, in a way, exactly what a cenote is. To understand how the ancient Maya built cities around sacred cenotes, you first have to understand how these strange watery openings came into existence at all. Because the Yucatan Peninsula is not like most places. It is basically one giant slab of porous limestone, formed over millions of years from ancient marine sediments. Long before Maya cities, before pyramids, before priests and potters and very tired farmers, this whole region was under shallow tropical seas. Tiny shells, coral fragments and marine organisms settled layer upon layer, eventually hardening into the pale bedrock beneath your feet. So yes, your grand ancient city is technically sitting on compressed sea leftovers. History is glamorous. Over vast stretches of time, rainwater seeps through that limestone. Now, rainwater is slightly acidic because it absorbs carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and soil. Not enough to make it dramatic or villainous, but enough to slowly dissolve rock. Very, very slowly. This is geologists' favourite hobby, taking forever.
Drop by drop, year after year, century after century, the water eats channels and hollows into the limestone. Underground rivers form, caves stretch out in darkness.
Hidden chambers appear beneath the forest floor, like secret rooms in a house built by an introvert. Then eventually, in some places, the cave ceiling collapses, and just like that, the underworld gets a skylight. That collapse creates a cenote, a natural opening to the groundwater below. Some are wide and open to the sky, ringed by roots and stone like giant wells. Others are partly covered, where the ceiling has only fallen in sections, and some remain almost entirely cave-like, entered through narrow cracks or shadowy openings that feel deeply inappropriate to explore without at least one torch and a very trustworthy friend. The mainstream historical fact here is that the northern Yucatan has very few surface rivers because its limestone absorbs rainfall so efficiently. Instead of flowing visibly across the land, much of the water disappears underground into these aquifers and cave systems. That means that for many Maya communities, especially in the north, freshwater access depended heavily on cenotes and related water management systems. In other words, if you want to build a city here, you do not follow the river, you follow the hole. You kneel near the edge and look down. The water seems endless, though in some cenotes it is relatively shallow and in others astonishingly deep. Modern divers have found that many cenotes connect to huge underwater cave systems stretching for kilometres beneath the peninsula. Some of these are among the longest submerged cave systems in the world, which means that beneath your sleepy little jungle clearing is an entire flooded labyrinth. Very peaceful, mildly terrifying, excellent for mythology. And the Maya of course noticed all of this. They may not have had modern geological terms, but they were brilliant observers of land and water. They understood where water collected, how long it lasted through the dry season, which cenotes were reliable, and which ones were less useful or more dangerous. Some cenotes offered easy access with sloping sides or ledges where jars could be lowered. Others had steep vertical walls that required ladders, ropes, or enough upper body strength to make modern office workers quietly resign from history. And this variety mattered. Not all cenotes are equal. Some provided dependable year-round drinking water. Some were seasonal or brackish. Some were best for ritual use. Some may have been avoided except on special occasions because they were too deep, too difficult, or too associated with spiritual danger. Historians still argue whether certain cenotes were reserved primarily for ceremonial purposes from the very beginning, or whether practical water use came first and sacred status developed gradually over time. Either way, the line between useful and holy was probably much blurrier than your modern brain wants it to be. Because if a hole in the ground is the reason your village does not die of thirst, you are not going to treat it casually. You are not going to toss in old sandals and call it a day. You are going to approach it with care, caution, and at least a little emotional theatre. There is also a wonderfully quirky detail about cenotes that would have impressed an unsettled ancient people in equal measure. They often create their own tiny microclimate. The air around them can be cooler and more humid, plants cluster differently, bird and insect activity shifts, the sound changes. Some cenotes echo strangely, and cave-connected ones can produce drips, breezes, and hollow acoustic murmurs that make it seem as if the earth is whispering back. If you were standing here at dusk with a torch and no scientific explanation, you would absolutely assume something divine, ghostly, or at the very least deeply nosy was living down there. And honestly, fair enough. The Maya world was shaped by this underground geography, in a way that is hard to overstate. The land itself trained people to think vertically, not just horizontally. Life was not only spread across the forest floor, it also extended downward into caves, shafts, and hidden water chambers. A sacred landscape was not just mountains and trees and stars, it was also openings, depths, and places where the surface world broke apart to reveal something older below. This is where the cenote becomes more than a practical feature. It becomes a threshold. You can already feel the idea taking shape in the Maya imagination. A place where life-giving water emerges from beneath the earth must be connected to forces beyond ordinary human control. It is not just a water source, it is a seam in reality, a place where worlds touch. The sky sends rain, the stone swallows it, the underworld stores it. Then the earth opens and offers it back. Honestly, if modern architecture worked this poetically, we would all be much less annoyed by plumbing bills. You run your hand over the limestone edge, worn smooth in places by time, weather, and generations of human use. Somewhere across centuries, thousands of hands have done exactly this. Some nervous, some tired, some reverent, some probably annoyed because they had to come fetch water again after someone forgot to fill the jars earlier. Civilization, at its core, is often just organised inconvenience. But here, inconvenience becomes ingenuity. Because once these natural formations existed, the Maya did not simply stumble upon them and carry on. They learnt them, named them, organised around them, and eventually built systems of life that depended on understanding their rhythms. Which cenote holds through the dry season? Which one is easiest to access? Which one is sacred? Which one tastes best? Which one is close enough to fields? Which one lies near trade paths or defensible high ground? These are not random questions. These are city-making questions. And as the last of the afternoon light filters across the water, you begin to understand something essential. The Maya did not conquer this landscape by forcing it to behave like somewhere else. They paid attention to what it already was. A porous world. A world of hidden channels. A world where stone and water made secret agreements underground. And if you wanted to live here, you had to learn those agreements too. The longer you stay near the cenote, the more obvious it becomes that this is not just a useful place. It is the place. People drift toward it with jars balanced on hips, woven baskets hanging from shoulders, and the practiced patience of human beings who know that if they do not get water now, they will absolutely regret it later. There is no casual suburban faucet here, no metal handle to twist, no mildly cursed plumbing under a kitchen sink. If you want water, you come to the hole in the earth and negotiate with gravity. And that means one simple thing: whoever controls this spot controls life. This is where the story becomes less beautiful jungle mystery and more quietly intense civic politics with a side of incense. Because in the ancient Maya world, water was never just a resource. It was power. It was status. It was ritual. It was economy. It was survival with administrative paperwork, except the paperwork is carved in stone and the penalties for poor planning are dehydration. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya cities were often organised around access to key environmental resources, especially reliable freshwater. In the northern lowlands, where cenotes could be the primary source of year-round water, settlement patterns frequently reflect the importance of these natural wells. Archaeologists have long noted that proximity to water strongly influenced where communities developed, expanded, and maintained authority. In other words, the cenote is not off to the side of the city like a nice little feature. It is often central to why the city exists at all. You begin to picture how this works socially. At first, maybe a small community forms near a dependable cenote because it is practical. Families settle, gardens appear, paths are worn into the earth, and over time that dependable water source becomes a kind of anchor. But as the population grows, access starts to matter more. Suddenly there are routines, expectations, maybe even rules. Who draws water first? Who maintains the path? Who keeps children from cannonballing into the sacred reservoir of everyone's continued existence? And yes, that last one is probably a rule for a reason. As villages become towns and towns become cities, access to the cenote becomes more than a daily chore. It becomes part of social structure. The people who live closest may gain convenience. The people who oversee rituals there may gain prestige. The rulers who claim divine favour over the water source may gain legitimacy. Before long, the sacred well is doing double duty as both municipal utility and cosmic branding opportunity. You can almost see the ancient political slogan now, "Vote for me," and the rain gods remain emotionally available. And honestly, this is not unusual in human history. Water control has always been tied to power. Ancient Egypt had the Nile, Mesopotamia had irrigation canals. Medieval towns fought over wells. Modern cities still panic if one pipe bursts at the wrong intersection. The Maya version just happens to involve a dramatic limestone portal that also seems like it might contain ancestral whispers and at least one mildly offended deity. The sacred side of this is impossible to separate from the practical side. If your city depends on a cenote for survival, then that cenote naturally becomes a place of reverence. It is where life comes from. It is where you gather. It is where the community literally sees its future reflected every day. So of course prayers happen there. Offerings happen there. Ceremonies happen there. The water is not merely owned or used. It is respected, feared, and woven into the entire mental map of society. Historians still argue whether the earliest ritual activity at certain cenotes began as spontaneous folk practice, or as something more formally guided by emerging priestly classes. But either way, once a society starts attaching divine meaning to the place that keeps everyone alive, authority tends to gather there like moss on wet stone. You notice now how movement around the cenote has its own social choreography. Older women may arrive early, chatting softly while lowering jars. Children hover nearby, half helpful and half chaotic. Men return from labour and wash dust from arms and necks. Traders stop to refill. Priests or local elites may approach with more ceremony, more personal space, and perhaps a deeply theatrical pause before speaking. The cenote is not just a water point. It is a stage where community life keeps performing itself. And because it is so central, it also becomes a place where hierarchy quietly shows. Maybe the finest access path is near the elite compounds. Maybe the best maintained stairway is connected to a ceremonial plaza. Maybe commoners must use certain areas while ritual specialists use others. Maybe offerings are cast from one ledge while water jars are lowered from another. These divisions may not always be written down in neat bullet points for archaeologists, which is frankly rude of the past. But the material evidence often hints that access was structured and socially meaningful. There is also a quirky and wonderfully human possibility here. The cenote was probably one of the busiest gossip centres in town. If you want to know who is feuding, who is getting married, who traded 3 baskets of maize for a questionable turkey, or whose cousin has once again borrowed the family carrying rope, you do not need a royal inscription. You need 5 minutes near the water at the right time of day. No empire in history has ever escaped the power of people talking while doing chores. But beyond gossip and status, water around the cenote also creates economic gravity. If people are constantly gathering here, then nearby spaces become useful for exchange. Potters might bring vessels, farmers might trade produce. Toolmakers might set up along footpaths. The area around a cenote could become a natural node for movement and interaction, and over generations that encourages roads, plazas, and eventually monumental architecture nearby. The city grows not randomly, but in response to the pulse of daily need. And that need is relentless. The dry season in the Yucatan is no joke. Rain does not politely arrive just because your storage jars are looking a little optimistic. There are months when the heat presses down and the forest crackles and every bucket of water feels more precious than yesterday. In those moments, the cenote is not a scenic landmark. It is the difference between endurance and disaster. which means political authority over it becomes even more important in times of stress. A ruler who can organise access, maintain surrounding infrastructure, sponsor rituals for rain, and appear spiritually favoured by the gods is not just a king. He is in effect the manager of everyone's continued hydration, which is not glamorous, but it is powerful. And because Maya rulers often linked themselves to cosmic order, rain cycles, fertility, and sacred geography, controlling cenotes gave them an ideal setting for public legitimacy. Stand near the sacred water, wear a feathered headdress large enough to inconvenience doorways, burn incense, speak with confidence. Congratulations, you now look like the official middle manager between humanity and the underworld. You watch the surface of the cenote ripple slightly as a leaf falls in. One small movement, then stillness again. And suddenly it makes sense why entire communities would orient themselves around places like this, not just physically, but emotionally and spiritually. A cenote offers more than water. It offers continuity. It becomes the place where births are prepared for, meals begin, fields are sustained, ceremonies are held, and memory accumulates. Every family in the city is tied to it somehow. Every generation knows its shape. So when the Maya build around a cenote, they are not just placing houses near a resource. They are building around the centre of gravity itself, around power, around prayer, around property, around the cool dark mirror that decides whether tomorrow is possible. Once you understand that a cenote can mean life, status and divine customer support, the next question becomes obvious. How exactly do you choose where to build a city in the first place? Because the Maya are not wandering blindly through the jungle, throwing up temples wherever a tree looks vaguely inspirational. City building here is a long, practical, spiritual, deeply sweaty process. And if you choose badly, you are not just inconvenienced. You are signing generations of people up for thirst, poor harvests, awkward road layouts, and the kind of civic regret that echoes for centuries. So now you imagine yourself standing with a small group of early planners, elders, ritual specialists, maybe a local leader with big opinions and surprisingly delicate sandals. They are surveying the land, not with drones, laser maps or clipboards, but with memory, experience, and an eye trained by generations of living in this peculiar limestone world. The first thing they care about, naturally, is water. Not just a cenote, but the right cenote. Because not every watery hole in the earth deserves to become the heart of a future city. Some are too deep and hard to access. Some may have unstable edges. Some might dry unpredictably, or have poor quality water. Some are tucked into awkward terrain where moving people and goods would be a nightmare. Imagine trying to build a major urban centre around a sacred sinkhole that requires everyone to rappel in like amateur cave enthusiasts. Inspirational, perhaps. Efficient, absolutely not. So they assess carefully. How much water does this cenote seem to hold through the dry season? Are there signs of year-round use by animals? Is the surrounding ground stable enough for repeated traffic? Can people reach it safely with jars, baskets, and tired children? Does it lie near arable land? Is there more than one water source nearby? These are not glamorous urban planning questions, but they are the difference between thriving ceremonial centre and everyone leaves after 2 summers. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya settlement patterns often show careful environmental adaptation. Archaeologists have found that many sites were chosen with attention to water access, defensible terrain, soil conditions, and transportation routes, especially in regions where resources were unevenly distributed. In the northern lowlands, proximity to cenotes and the ability to store or supplement water likely played a major role in long-term site viability. So yes, your ancient city is being planned with a level of practical thought that would humble at least half of modern parking lot design. But water alone is not enough. You also need usable land nearby, and here the Maya have to think creatively, because the Yucatan landscape is not exactly generous. Some soils are thin and rocky. Some areas are better for maize and squash than others. Some nearby forest patches are useful for timber, medicinal plants and hunting. Some zones flood seasonally, others crack under dry season heat like a forgotten tortilla. So city planners are not just looking for a cenote. They are looking for a whole package deal: dependable water, decent surrounding land, manageable terrain, and enough space to support growth over time. And then there is visibility. You stand on a slight rise and imagine what the area would look like cleared. Can ceremonial buildings be seen from afar? Is there a naturally elevated area where temples or elite compounds could rise above the canopy? Does the land allow roads to radiate outward? Could a processional path connect the cenote to a future plaza? If you are a Maya ruler or priest, you do not just want a functional city. You want one that looks cosmically intentional. You want visitors arriving dusty and exhausted to immediately think, "Ah yes, these people clearly know what they are doing." That visual authority matters. Because Maya cities are not random clusters of buildings, they are often carefully arranged ceremonial landscapes. Plazas, pyramids, shrines, causeways and residential zones are laid out in ways that reflect both practical movement and sacred meaning. So when a site is chosen, planners are already imagining how the city can unfold around the natural features of the land, especially around the cenote. Historians still argue whether certain Maya cities were planned in a strongly centralized way from early on, or whether many grew more gradually in layers, with sacred and political centers becoming formalized over time. And, as usual, reality is probably a mix. Some places may have started as practical settlements near water and evolved into ceremonial centers. Others may have been founded with much more explicit ritual and political intention from the start. Either way, nobody is just winging it. There is also a fringe but fascinating possibility that certain site choices were influenced by subtle acoustic, visual or atmospheric qualities around cenotes. Some scholars and researchers have suggested that places with unusual echoes, cave airflow or dramatic natural formations may have seemed especially spiritually potent. If a cenote glows blue at noon, mists at dawn, and makes your voice sound like it belongs to a ghost accountant from the underworld, that probably gives it a slight edge in the sacred real estate market. And honestly, fair. Humans love a dramatic backdrop. As you move through this imagined pre-city landscape, you begin to notice that the Maya are reading the environment in layers. Surface and subsurface. Practical and symbolic. Soil and sky. A low ridge may offer good drainage and a nice foundation for structures. A nearby cenote may provide water and sacred authority. A line of stars may align with a future temple axis. A cluster of trees may mark a place already known in oral tradition. This is planning, yes, but it is also listening. That listening matters because the Maya are not trying to erase the landscape. They are trying to work with it. This is one of the quietest and smartest things about how they built. They do not look at the Yucatan and demand it become a river valley. They accept the terms of the place. They learn where the stone breathes, where the water hides, where the rains collect, where the roads can run, and then they build in conversation with those realities. There is something deeply soothing about that, even if it comes with approximately 100 mosquito bites. You can imagine the first clearing now. Trees cut back, brush burned, footpaths marked, a few structures rising near the safest and most accessible approach to the cenote. Maybe a shrine appears early, perhaps simple at first, a marker, a platform, a place to acknowledge the importance of what lies below. Nearby, homes cluster, gardens begin, storage pits are dug, stone is quarried. The city is not yet a city, but it has chosen its centre, and from that centre, everything else will begin to spread. Roads will eventually radiate outward, plazas will form where people gather, temples will climb into the sky, markets will buzz, rulers will posture. Children will run barefoot through spaces that are still just raw ground and possibility, all because somebody, generations earlier, looked at a patch of forest and stone and recognised that the right hole in the earth could hold an entire future. So when the Maya choose a city site, they are not simply asking, can we live here? They are asking something much bigger. Can this place feed us, water us, protect us, impress the gods, support our descendants, and still look magnificent at sunrise? If the answer is yes, then congratulations. The jungle is about to become a city. Once the site is chosen, the romance of sacred landscape very quickly turns into the practical reality of all right then, who is carrying the rocks? Because building a Maya city around a cenote is not some dreamy architectural sketch drawn on bark paper while birds sing approvingly overhead. It is labour, sweat, dust, rope, stone, more stone, then a little extra stone, just to keep everyone humble. You wake before dawn in your imagination, and already the air is warm. The forest around the chosen settlement is no longer untouched. Clearings have been hacked into the green, footpaths have widened into real routes. Stumps and brush piles mark the places where future homes, shrines, and public spaces will stand. Somewhere nearby, someone is loudly discovering that hauling limestone blocks uphill was not their preferred spiritual journey. And through all of this, the cenote remains the anchor. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya cities were built with remarkable sophistication using locally available materials, especially limestone. In the Yucatan and surrounding lowlands, builders quarried stone for foundations, platforms, walls, stairways, and monumental architecture. Urban planning often reflected both ceremonial priorities and environmental adaptation, especially where water access and seasonal rainfall shaped everyday survival. So how do you build a city in a place where the most important water source is underground and the land above is rocky, uneven, and occasionally dramatic for no reason? Carefully. The first challenge is circulation. People need to move constantly between homes, fields, workspaces, plazas, and the cenote itself. That means paths must be worn, widened, and stabilised. If the city grows, these become roads and processional routes. In many Maya regions, raised stone roads called sakbiob, white roads, eventually connect key parts of cities and even stretch between settlements. But even at the local level, movement matters. You do not want your main water route turning into a muddy ankle-breaking obstacle every rainy season. So the builders shape the ground. Loose rock is cleared, slopes are cut into steps, platforms are levelled. Retaining walls may be built in places to support construction. The terrain around the cenote itself often needs special attention, because people will be approaching it daily with jars, baskets, and the emotional energy of people on their third errand before breakfast. Access must be manageable. Safe enough, at least by ancient standards, which are generally safe-ish, probably. Some cenotes naturally offer gentle approaches or shelves where people can stand. Others require modification. Stone steps might be cut. Paths might be reinforced. Areas around the edge may be kept open for gathering, drawing water, or ritual use. The cenote is not just there in the middle of the city like a decorative koi pond. It has to function. And function means infrastructure. Now you start seeing the city take shape in layers. Closest to the most central, ritually important areas, large stone platforms rise first. These create stable, elevated surfaces for temples, elite residences, and ceremonial buildings. In a tropical climate with seasonal rains, elevation helps. It keeps structures above mud, runoff, and the general indignity of flooding your sacred plaza. It also looks impressive, which is never a drawback if you are trying to persuade people that your leadership has cosmic approval. Further out, homes begin to cluster. Most ordinary Maya houses are not giant stone palaces. They are often built with perishable materials, wooden frames, thatched roofs, plastered walls, and raised stone foundations. That last part matters. Even common residences may sit on low stone platforms, helping with drainage, stability, and maybe a slight psychological boost that says, yes, this is my respectable little household, and not just a damp rectangle in the jungle. The city does not appear all at once. It grows through repeated choices, where to place homes, where to leave open space, where to quarry stone, where to route traffic, where to store goods, where to gather, and always how to stay connected to water. Historians still argue whether the layout of some Maya cities was driven more by centralized elite planning or by centuries of organic growth around sacred and practical nodes like cenotes. But either way, once a water source becomes central, the rest of the urban pattern tends to organize around it, directly or indirectly. Water is not one feature among many, it is the logic beneath the map. There is also a delightfully nerdy and underappreciated challenge here: drainage. Because yes, the Maya need water. But they also need to control where rainwater goes when it does arrive. Too much uncontrolled runoff can erode pathways, damage structures, and create soggy misery in places where you would rather have dignified public architecture. So urban spaces often include subtle grading, channels, plastered surfaces, and catchment systems that guide water where it can be used or safely shed. This is one of those moments where ancient people become almost offensively competent. While many of us today cannot get a parking lot to drain correctly, the Maya are out here designing tropical urban hydrology with stone tools and determination. And because surface rivers are absent in much of the northern lowlands, water planning becomes even more important beyond the cenote itself. Builders and planners often create or maintain supplementary storage systems, such as reservoirs, depressions, and eventually cultins, bottle-shaped underground cisterns carved into limestone for storing rainwater. Even if the cenote is the star of the show, the supporting cast is doing a lot of work. The quirky tidbit here is that some of these water systems were so integrated into settlement life that your average Maya household was probably much more aware of rainfall management than your average modern apartment renter, who may regard drainage as a problem that magically belongs to somebody else. As construction continues, the city becomes louder. Stone hammers strike. Voices carry. Dust hangs in the sunlight. Children weave through work crews until somebody yells for them to stop climbing unfinished walls. Somewhere, a priest is probably insisting that a foundation alignment is cosmically significant, while a labourer nearby is privately thinking that a straighter path to the water would also be nice, thanks. And this is the truth of city building. Sacred meaning and daily inconvenience are always roommates. The cenote remains visible, or at least accessible, within this growing complexity. In some settlements it may lie right near ceremonial architecture, almost embraced by the city's sacred core. In others it may be slightly offset, but still central to movement and identity. Either way, it is built around not by accident, but by necessity and design. You can almost feel the settlement becoming permanent. What was once forest and possibility is now becoming memory in stone. The path to the water is now walked smooth by hundreds of feet. A shrine near the cenote now holds offerings. A plaza begins to gather people for market days and rituals. A home built on a low platform becomes a place where generations will sleep, cook, argue, and very occasionally pretend they definitely did not forget to refill the jars. And beneath it all, invisible but decisive, the underground water remains. That is the strange beauty of this city. Its most important architecture is the part nature built first. Everything else, the temples, roads, houses, reservoirs, and grand civic ambition, is the Maya answer to that one simple geological fact. The water is below, so they do what humans do best when they truly understand a place. They build not against it, but around it. Stone by stone, path by path, jar by jar. And slowly, a sacred hole in the earth becomes the centre of an urban world. Now that the city has started to rise from the jungle, you begin to notice something that goes beyond convenience, beyond plumbing, beyond even the respectable civic thrill of a well-built walkway. This place is not arranged only for survival. It is arranged to mean something. Because the Maya are not just building a city around a cenote. They are building a universe around one. You walk into the growing ceremonial centre at first light. The stone underfoot is cool from the night, the plaza wide and open, the morning air carrying that brief and magical illusion that perhaps today will not be extremely hot. Around you, structures rise in deliberate relation to one another. Temple platforms, shrines, broad staircases, open plazas, perhaps a ball court nearby, perhaps elite compounds slightly elevated with the calm confidence of people who definitely expect to be looked at. And somewhere within this layout, sometimes central, sometimes closely tied by path or ritual axis, is the cenote. Not tucked away as a utility feature. Integrated. This is where the sacred geography of the Maya world begins to reveal itself. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya cities were often planned as ceremonial landscapes reflecting cosmological ideas. Architecture could align with celestial events, cardinal directions, sacred topography, and ritual movement. Temples, plazas, causeways, and other public spaces were not simply functional. They were part of a worldview in which space itself could express order, power, and connection to the divine. So if you are wondering whether that pyramid, that plaza, and that mysterious water-filled hole in the ground are all related, the answer is yes. Very much yes. The Maya understood the universe as layered. There is the world of daily human life, of crops and households and politics, and somebody inevitably forgetting where they put the obsidian blade. But there is also the sky world above, full of celestial bodies, gods, and patterned motion. And there is the underworld below, a realm not necessarily evil in the cartoon sense, but powerful, mysterious, ancestral, and deeply entangled with death, fertility, caves, and transformation. And what is a cenote, if not a literal opening into below? This is why cenotes become spiritually charged in a way rivers often are not. A river flows beside you, a cenote opens beneath you. It is vertical, hidden, and intimate. It suggests depth in every sense. Water comes from there, but so might ancestors, gods, rain, messages, danger, or the cosmic equivalent of a strongly worded memo. And once you believe that, the city around it begins to look different. The temple near the cenote is not merely close by because the view is nice. It may stand there because the sacred centre of the city needs to be in conversation with the sacred opening in the earth. A processional route may connect plaza to water because ritual movement matters. A shrine may face a particular direction not just for aesthetics, but because it aligns with celestial or seasonal rhythms that link sky, land, and underworld in one ritual geometry. Historians still argue whether some Maya site layouts were consciously designed as full cosmograms, physical maps of the cosmos, or whether many symbolic meanings accumulated more gradually over generations. But there is little doubt that sacred space was built intentionally. Maya cities are not random sprawl, they are thought made visible. And honestly, they make many modern shopping centres look spiritually underachieving. As you stand in the plaza, you can imagine how this layout would feel to someone living here. The open central space gathers people. The temple stairs draw the eye upward. The ball court marks ritualized competition and performance. The cenote anchors the unseen downward. You are constantly being oriented. Up, down, centre, edge, path, threshold. The city teaches you where you are in the world simply by how it is arranged. That is not just architecture. That is worldview with stairs. One especially intriguing and slightly eerie fringe tidbit is that caves and cenotes across the Maya world often seem to have been treated almost like animate presences, places that could receive offerings, respond to ritual, and participate in the life of the community. In some Maya traditions, caves and watery openings were understood as entrances to sacred realms, sources of rain and fertility, or dwellings of supernatural beings. So if you are standing beside a cenote and feeling like you should probably lower your voice, that instinct is historically appropriate. And because the cenote is part of the sacred centre, it affects movement through the city in ways that are not only practical. Certain days may bring processions from temple to water. Certain rituals may require a descent, a casting of offerings, a spoken invocation, or a gathering at dawn when the first light hits the plaza and the priests are doing their absolute best to seem cosmically synchronized. Which, to be fair, they often are. Maya rulers and priests are deeply invested in making the city feel like the centre of a meaningful universe. If the gods send rain, if the stars move in order, if the underworld yields life through water, then the city must be aligned with those truths. A ruler who presides over that alignment is not just a political leader, he is a mediator of cosmic order, or at least that is the branding. You can picture a ceremony now. Incense curling into the morning air, a line of participants crossing the plaza. Music, drums, rattles, maybe shell trumpets, rolling softly across stone. The temple above catches sunlight. The cenote below catches shadow. One space reaches upward, the other downward, and the people move between them like a thread, sewing the worlds together. That choreography matters. Because when you build sacred architecture around a cenote, you are not simply saying, here is where we get water. You are saying, here is where life enters the world. Here is where below touches above. Here is where our city is stitched into the universe. And once that belief takes root, every structure nearby gains extra weight. The plaza is not just open space, it is a stage for cosmic participation. The temple is not just tall, it is elevated access to divine order. The cenote is not just deep, it is sacred depth made visible. Even ordinary people, going about ordinary tasks, would absorb this layout every day. A child carrying water from the cenote walks the same path used in rituals. A farmer crossing the plaza sees the same temple alignments as a priest. A market vendor sets up near spaces layered with myth and authority. Sacred meaning is not locked away for elites. It is built into the lived environment, which is perhaps one of the most elegant things about Maya urban design. The city does not just contain religion, the city performs it. So as the morning sun climbs and the shadows shorten, you begin to understand that the cenote is not merely the city's source of water. It is its axis, its dark, cool centre, its underworld mirror, and everything built around it, stone by stone, plaza by plaza, prayer by prayer, is part of a much larger attempt to make human life feel aligned with the hidden architecture of existence itself. Not bad for a hole in the ground. By now the temples are standing, the plazas are laid out, the roads are taking shape, and the city has all the dignified geometry of a place that would very much like to be remembered. But for most people living here, sacred symbolism is only part of the story. Because eventually, even in a beautifully planned Maya city aligned with cosmic order and underground water systems, somebody still has to go fetch the actual water. And that somebody is, very often, you. So this morning begins not with incense or astronomy, but with a clay jar, a sore shoulder, and the quiet realization that hydration in the ancient world was a full-body hobby. You walk toward the cenote along a familiar path, and already there are people ahead of you. The day is young enough that the sun is still behaving itself, but not for long. You can hear footsteps on stone, low voices, the occasional laugh, and the soft scrape of pottery against woven carrying straps. This is one of the most ordinary scenes in the city, and because it is ordinary, it matters enormously. The mainstream historical fact here is that access to water shaped the rhythm of daily life in many Maya communities. In regions dependent on cenotes and stored rainwater, household routines would have revolved around collecting, carrying, storing, and using water carefully for drinking, cooking, cleaning, craft work, and sometimes small-scale gardening or food processing. In other words, the city's sacred centre also doubles as everyone's morning errand. And like all errands, it comes with social consequences. The cenote at this hour is busy, but not chaotic. People know how to move around one another. There are unspoken rules, inherited habits, and the general ancient human understanding that if you block access while adjusting your basket for too long, somebody behind you will absolutely notice. You watch women lower jars with practiced control, balancing weight and angle so the vessel fills without smashing against the stone. A young boy tries to help and nearly leans too far over the edge, earning a sharp correction from an older relative and a look that says, "I did not carry you for 9 months, so you could swan dive into the underworld. Ancient parenting remains undefeated. Some cenotes are easier to access than others. Here, perhaps there are carved steps or a sloped approach where people can stand more securely. Maybe a worn ledge shows where generations have braced their feet. Maybe there is a system of ropes, poles, or simple wooden supports to help lower containers. The details vary, but the principle is constant. This is labour-made routine through repetition, and repetition creates community. Because the cenote is not just where you get water, it is where you see people. You hear who is ill, whose field is doing well, whose daughter is learning to weave, whose brother has gone off with traders, whose household is repairing a roof before the rains, and who, once again, forgot to return the grinding stone. This is the social bloodstream of the city. You do not need a town crier when you have a shared water source and several generations of people with opinions. The quirky tidbit here is that in many pre-modern societies, communal water spots were also natural centres of courtship, rumour, and very subtle showing off. And there is no reason to think Maya life was exempt from the timeless tradition of somebody arriving at the water source, pretending they just happened to be passing by, while actually hoping a certain someone notices their unusually competent jar-lifting technique. Romance, as ever, begins with hydration and mild theatricality. But daily life at the cenote is not only social, it is deeply practical. Water must be carried back to households and stored carefully, often in ceramic vessels that are heavy, fragile, and absolutely not designed for clumsy modern people with weak wrists and overconfidence. You can feel the weight pressing into your arms, your neck, your shoulders. Even a modest amount of water becomes exhausting over repeated trips. This is where you remember that ancient life is full of tasks modern people would call an unacceptable amount of cardio. Historians still argue whether some Maya households relied almost entirely on nearby communal sources like cenotes, or whether access to supplemental storage systems like household cisterns or neighbourhood reservoirs varied enough to create meaningful differences in labour and convenience between social classes or city districts. But there is little doubt that water work was unevenly experienced. If you lived close to a good access point, life was easier. If you lived farther out or on rougher terrain, every sip had a commute. And that shapes everything. Think of cooking, for example. Every pot of maize porridge, every stew, every drink, every washing of beans or squash or chile begins here. Every child bathed, every cloth rinsed, every hand washed before grinding grain, every vessel cleaned after use, it all depends on this quiet repeated pilgrimage to the water's edge. You notice too that the cenote has moods. At sunrise it is communal and practical. By midday it can be glaring and less pleasant. The stone hot, the work slower, the shade more valuable than gold. At dusk it softens again, reflecting the sky in that strange way deep water does, where the world above seems to melt into the world below. Different times of day likely carry different uses, different groups, different emotional textures. Morning for chores, midday for necessity, evening for quiet, perhaps even for reflection or private prayer. And because the cenote is sacred as well as useful, ordinary behaviour here probably comes with boundaries. Children are warned. Certain gestures may be respectful, certain areas may be avoided, certain times may be reserved for ritual or taboo. You do not just splash around in the city's underworld portal like it is a holiday resort, even if some teenager in every century has absolutely tried. There is also a subtle dignity in the routine itself. To come to the cenote each day is to participate in the life of the city in the most literal way possible. You are not merely using infrastructure, you are sustaining continuity. The same path your grandmother walked, you walk. The same stone edge your ancestors touched, you touch. The same water that feeds the city fills your jar. That kind of repetition becomes identity. And maybe, if you pause long enough, you begin to understand why Maya cities feel so deeply tied to these places. Not just because they are useful, but because they gather human life so completely. At the cenote, sacred belief and ordinary necessity are not separate categories. They stand shoulder to shoulder in the morning light, both waiting their turn. Someone laughs nearby. A jar knocks gently against stone. A bird flits across the opening overhead. And for a moment the whole city seems to breathe in rhythm with this one dark pool. You lift your water, adjust the weight, and start back toward the rising homes and plazas. Tomorrow you will do it again. And so will everyone else. Because this is what it means to build a city around a cenote, not just to honour it from afar, but to live your entire life in orbit around its cool, patient depth. You leave the cenote path behind for now, and follow the city's edge outward, where stone gives way to scrub, brush, and the stubborn patchwork of fields that somehow have to feed all these people. And if the sacred centre of the city is where Maya life gathers, the farmland beyond it is where Maya life proves whether all this planning was actually a good idea. Because temples are lovely, plazas are impressive, cosmology is elegant, but none of it matters if the maze has a bad year. The land around you is not soft, deep river valley soil. It is thin in places, rocky in others, and generally the kind of terrain that seems to believe agriculture should be earned through character development. Roots push through limestone cracks. The sun arrives with immediate confidence. The breeze, when it appears, feels less like relief and more like the forest politely exhaling in your direction. And still somehow the Maya make this work. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya agriculture was highly adaptive and regionally varied. Farmers cultivated staple crops such as maize, beans, squash and chili peppers, often using techniques tailored to local conditions, shifting cultivation, forest gardening, terracing, raised fields in wetter zones, and careful management of seasonal rainfall and soil fertility. In places where water was uneven or underground, successful farming depended not on brute force, but on extraordinary environmental knowledge. In short, the Maya did not farm by pretending the landscape was easier than it was. They farmed by becoming smarter than it. You imagine yourself walking with a farmer before sunrise, carrying a digging stick, and the sleepy resignation of someone who has already accepted that the earth will fight back today. The fields are not endless open rectangles like modern industrial farmland. They are often interwoven with forest edges, house gardens, and managed clearings. This is a working landscape, but also a living one. Maize is the centre of everything, not just as food, but as identity. In Maya belief and daily life, maize is more than a crop. It is deeply tied to human existence itself. The Popol Vuh, a foundational Quiché Maya text recorded after the Spanish conquest but preserving much older traditions, famously describes humans as being formed from maize dough after earlier creation attempts fail. So yes, when you say corn matters, you are dramatically understating things. If maize fails, people do not just get hungry. The entire social and spiritual rhythm of life begins to wobble. That is why access to water, especially around cenote-centred cities, is so critical. Even when the fields themselves are not irrigated directly from cenotes in a modern canal sense, those water sources support household survival, food preparation, nearby garden cultivation, and overall settlement viability. Water at the city core makes the farming landscape around it sustainable. You stop near a patch of milpa, the traditional intercropping system where maize, beans and squash are grown together. It is one of those ancient agricultural ideas that is so practical it feels mildly insulting to modern monoculture. Maize grows upward, beans climb the stalks, squash spreads low to shade the soil and suppress weeds. Everyone contributes. Everyone cooperates. It is basically the opposite of a group project in high school. And it works beautifully. Beans help replenish nitrogen in the soil, squash leaves help hold moisture, maize provides structure and calories. This system is not random. It is refined ecological intelligence, developed over generations by people who knew exactly how precious every patch of productive land could be. The quirky tidbit here is that the Maya also made wide use of home gardens and managed forest spaces, packed with useful plants, fruit trees, herbs, fibres, medicinal species and food crops, all arranged in ways that can look wild to modern eyes, but are actually deeply intentional. So if you are picturing farm as one tidy fenced square, think less suburban allotment and more botanical strategy disguised as jungle. Historians still argue whether some large Maya urban populations could be fully supported by nearby local agriculture alone, or whether certain cities depended more heavily on broader regional food networks, seasonal redistribution, or imported staples during stress periods. It is one of the big questions in understanding how these urban centres actually functioned at scale. Because feeding a few families is one thing. Feeding a ceremonial city full of priests, nobles, labourers, artisans, traders, and at least one guy who insists he is between occupations is another, and that is where planning matters again. The city around the cenote does not just need water for drinking, it needs enough reliable environmental support that people can continue planting, harvesting, storing and surviving through both abundance and lean seasons. Farmers learn rainfall patterns intimately. They know when to burn and clear, when to sow, when to watch the sky with increasing emotional investment, and when to quietly panic if the clouds keep refusing to behave. Because drought is always waiting in the wings. A few bad rainy seasons can push everything into tension. Thin soils dry faster, yields fall, labour grows harder, stored water becomes more important, sacred rituals intensify. Everyone suddenly becomes much more interested in whether the gods are accepting feedback this month. You can almost hear the conversations now. Did you see the clouds over the East Ridge? Yes. Do you think it means rain? No. Should we still hope? Obviously, that is ancient agriculture in one exchange. And yet, there is something deeply calming about the rhythm of this life when it is working. The scrape of digging sticks, the rustle of leaves, the soft crackle of dry soil breaking under careful pressure, the smell of warm earth and green maize, the return path to the city with baskets, bundles, and maybe a little dust in every possible fold of clothing. The cenote remains part of this even when you are far from it. Every planted seed depends on the city surviving. Every meal depends on water carried from the sacred well. Every household task loops back to that underground source. And so the city and the fields are not separate worlds. They are one breathing system. This is what makes Maya urban life so impressive. It is not just architecture in the jungle. It is a finely balanced relationship between hidden water, difficult land, and human patience. A city around a cenote is only possible because thousands of ordinary people know how to coax life out of stone, heat, and uncertainty. That is not glamorous work. It is repetitive, exhausting, weather-dependent, and occasionally rude to your knees. But it is also a kind of brilliance. As the sun rises higher and the fields begin to shimmer in the heat, you turn back toward the city. In the distance, the temple tops lift above the trees, and somewhere beyond them the cenote waits in its cool pocket of shadow. The water below the city, the food beyond it, and all the careful labour in between. That is how you keep a sacred city alive. Returning to the city from the fields, you notice how the urban rhythms of daily life start to overlap with the sacred. Traders carry baskets of food, crafted goods, or shells along the stone paths. Children weave through the alleys, laughing as someone inevitably trips over the edge of a low platform. Smoke curls from cooking fires, blending with the warm, humid morning air. The sound of hammers and chisels from ongoing construction blends with voices negotiating, storytelling, and the occasional ceremonial chant. The city is alive, breathing in coordinated chaos. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya cities were bustling centres of trade and craft, with artisans, merchants and labourers all contributing to a complex urban ecosystem. Goods were exchanged not just for survival, but as markers of status, religious significance, or cultural connection. Shells, jade, obsidian, cacao and woven textiles moved through these streets, connecting the city internally and linking it to broader regional networks. The cenote as a water source allowed these activities to flourish by sustaining the human and agricultural lifeblood. And yet, for all this activity, the cenote remains the city's anchor, physically and symbolically. Pilgrims and ordinary citizens alike pass by or pause near its shaded rim. Offerings float on its water or are lowered with careful ceremony. You imagine that even as the city's population swells, there is a constant, almost meditative attention paid to the water, a recognition that no amount of stonework, maze or trade can replace the life that flows from below. A quirky tidbit is that some cenotes were believed to be inhabited by deities or supernatural beings. Certain cenotes may have been reserved for elite rituals, while others were used by the general population. There are even stories, passed down through oral tradition and later codices, of individuals claiming to receive visions or messages from the waters. You probably won't stumble upon an actual oracle today, but ancient Maya certainly thought they might, and treated these watery portals with extraordinary care. Historians still argue whether every Maya city explicitly designated which cenotes were public and which were ritually restricted, or whether access evolved organically over time, depending on local traditions and the political will of ruling elites. Regardless, these water sources were central to civic planning, social interaction, and spiritual life. By mid-morning, you can feel the weight of the city's layered functions. The cenote, the plazas, the houses, and the fields are all interdependent. A misstep in any one area, poor water management, failed harvests, or construction errors, would ripple through daily life. Maya architects, planners, and common citizens alike understood this, and they developed adaptive strategies, reservoirs for dry periods, raised platforms to prevent flooding, and careful alignment of buildings for both functional and symbolic purposes. You stroll past a raised platform near the cenote, noticing traces of offerings, carved figurines, small pottery vessels, perhaps even a carefully wrapped bundle of maize. It is a reminder that sacred practices were intimately entwined with the practical. Fetching water, preparing food, trading goods, and performing rituals were not isolated acts. They were components of a holistic urban life, all orbiting the cenote like planets around a subtle invisible sun. And here is another slightly whimsical detail. Some Maya believed that the cenote's waters held not only physical sustenance, but spiritual energy. This may explain why certain rituals involve tossing gifts into the depths, sometimes jewellery, sometimes small food items, sometimes seeds. Imagine, if you will, a mischievous child watching a gold bead sink into dark water, wondering if it will sprout a tiny treasure tree someday. That curiosity and playfulness was part of daily life, even amid the gravity of spiritual devotion. Historians still argue how frequently such offerings occurred in everyday life versus elite ceremonial contexts, or whether they represented true belief, symbolic practice, or a combination of both. Evidence is patchy, fragmented by centuries of time, erosion, and changing cultural practices. Yet what is clear is that the cenote was central to both the city's physical survival and its spiritual imagination. You notice how ordinary movement, walking from house to plaza, carrying water, or transporting maize, creates rhythm in the city. Footsteps echo across stone, voices overlap with tools, and the cenote's quiet presence acts as a constant counterpoint, reminding all who approach it that life flows both above and below. Ritual, necessity, and play intersect, and the city hums with the subtle harmony of human persistence. As you pause to watch the shadows shift across the temple steps, you realize that the cenote does more than anchor a city. It anchors a way of life. Daily labor, social connections, sacred practices, and cosmic contemplation all converge at this single enigmatic source. And in that convergence, Maya urban design achieves something remarkable. A city that is both practical and profoundly poetic, grounded in water yet reaching toward the sky. By the time the sun reaches its zenith, you can almost feel the heat radiating off the stone platforms. The scent of baked earth mixes with the forest beyond. Life continues around the cenote with the quiet assurance of repetition. Jars are filled, offerings are made, maize is distributed, and the city breathes in cycles of work and ritual that will repeat tomorrow, and the next day, and the next, perhaps for generations. and you walk away thinking about the remarkable human ingenuity that allows a simple hole in the ground to dictate the architecture, economy, and spiritual rhythm of an entire civilization. As the afternoon begins, the city's pace changes. The sun climbs higher, shadows shorten, and the heat presses gently but insistently against the stone and the people moving across it. Merchants settle more firmly into their stalls, children retreat into shaded corridors between platforms, and the sound of drums from distant ceremonial areas softens into the background hum of daily life. It is not that activity ceases, it is that movement shifts, from bustling to deliberate, from energetic to rhythmically patient. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya daily life involved highly structured patterns, often dictated by celestial events, agricultural cycles, and social obligations. Markets opened and closed at predictable times. Labour was divided among genders and classes in customary ways. Ceremonies followed solar and lunar schedules. This order created an almost meditative rhythm, where city life functioned with both predictability and flexibility, supporting the survival and flourishing of urban communities in an environment that could be unforgiving. You notice a small group near the Cenotes. They are not fetching water. Instead, they are arranging ceremonial offerings, small clay figurines, woven bundles, and seeds delicately balanced in leaves. The act is quiet, intimate, and deliberate. Someone hums softly as they work, a gentle counterpoint to the occasional clatter of pots or the distant bark of a dog. You might assume this is the work of priests alone, but in reality the participation of ordinary citizens was common in many rituals. The cenote, after all, belongs to the city collectively, in both practical and spiritual terms. A quirky tidbit emerges: in some Maya communities, offerings thrown into cenotes were believed to influence rainfall, agricultural success, or even the outcome of social disputes. Imagine tossing a tiny figurine into deep water, hoping it might encourage a cloud to wander over your crops, or to settle a neighbourly disagreement in favour of your household. It is charmingly human, this blending of faith, practicality, and everyday negotiation with nature. And you cannot help but smile at the thought that water, centuries later, continues to hold such sway over our imaginations. Historians still argue how formal or informal these rituals were, whether they followed strict ceremonial protocols, or whether local tradition allowed improvisation by individual families. The evidence is tantalizingly incomplete, and the debate persists because every cenote is unique, every community slightly different, and every archaeologist a little tempted by the romance of narrative over certainty. Walking further, you notice the subtle signs of urban life layered across the cityscape. Stone steps leading up to private homes show wear from countless generations. Walls are painted in muted, sun-bleached hues. Pathways curve around plazas, not just for functional efficiency, but also to preserve sacred axes or align with celestial phenomena. Even the act of carrying a jar of water or a basket of maize across this city is infused with awareness of place, meaning, and social cohesion. This is not random movement, it is choreography dictated by geography, belief, and necessity. And yet, the cenote remains the quiet centre. It does not shout, it does not demand attention, but its presence is constant. You can feel the pull of its depth, the echo of its sacred significance, the invisible tether that binds daily labour, ritual, and human interaction. Everyone living here, from the youngest child to the elder overseeing the ceremonies, is subtly oriented around this dark, still water. It is both literal and symbolic gravity. You pause near the temple that overlooks the cenote. The structure itself is a marvel: broad stone steps, precisely aligned angles, and carvings that depict celestial motifs, deities, and the occasional playful animal. The temple's position relative to the cenote is deliberate, as if to suggest that heaven and underworld converge here in human experience. As sunlight glints off the stone, you can almost imagine the rhythmic pulse of past rituals, the soft chants echoing across the plaza, and the gentle splash of offerings entering the water below. Historians still argue whether some temples were intentionally aligned with specific celestial events, or whether functional needs like visibility, proximity to water or structural stability, dictated their placement. In truth, both considerations likely played a role, creating a multi-layered urban environment where practical engineering and sacred symbolism coexist seamlessly. Nearby, a small child dips a hand into the cenote, testing the water's depth and temperature, her reflection wavering across the dark surface. It is a private, playful interaction, yet it embodies the enduring intimacy between humans and this sacred source. Water here is not abstract. It is relational. It is tactile. It is lived. The afternoon drifts on, shadows lengthen, the heat softens into tolerable warmth, and the city moves with a rhythm that is both subtle and profound. You realise that the Cenotes is not just a feature of urban planning, it is the lifeblood around which culture, spirituality, and ordinary existence are entangled. Every stone, every jar, every ritual offering, every measured footstep across the plaza reflects this intricate interplay. You leave the temple and return to the central path, noticing again the quiet elegance of the city in motion. Trade, ritual, labour, and play intersect seamlessly. The cenote remains the anchor, not with authority, but with presence, and as the light begins to shift toward evening, you understand the genius of Maya urban design. It is a city that literally and figuratively revolves around water, weaving together necessity, belief, and human experience into a coherent and enduring whole. As the afternoon softens into early evening, the city takes on a different kind of rhythm. The sun slides lower in the sky, casting long shadows across plazas, stairways, and rooftops. The heat eases, replaced by a gentle warmth that seems to settle into the stone, into the earth, and into the bodies of everyone moving through the city. Merchants begin packing up their wares, children tire of play and retreat to shaded corridors or small courtyards, and the faint scent of cooking fires drifts upward, blending with the earthy aroma of the surrounding forest. The city exhales, moving from the bustling clarity of daytime tasks to the softer, quieter cadence of evening preparation. The mainstream historical fact is that Maya urban life was structured around the natural cycles of the day. Work, trade, ritual, and leisure were all coordinated to make the most of daylight, the heat, and the demands of agriculture and social interaction. Markets had opening and closing times. Ceremonies were timed with celestial events, seasonal cycles, or religious calendars. Even simple household chores like fetching water or preparing maize were integrated into this larger temporal rhythm, making the city itself a living organism that responded to light, weather, and social needs. Walking along the city's main pathway, you notice a group of women carrying water back from the cenote. Their movements are deliberate and precise, honed through repetition. You almost envy their practiced efficiency. One woman balances her jar with subtle adjustments, while a child follows closely, mimicking the technique with a smaller vessel. Every motion is purposeful, every step is measured, and yet there is room for laughter, for gentle teasing, for small human moments that make the chore bearable. Perhaps it is the shared knowledge that even the mundane carries significance, or maybe it is just the resilience of human habit. Either way, you watch, fascinated. A quirky tidbit: some Maya water jars were designed not only for utility, but for cooling. Certain ceramic techniques allowed water to stay slightly chilled by evaporation, a practical delight in the often sweltering climate. This subtle blend of function, art, and ingenuity reminds you that the Maya were constantly thinking about how to make life more efficient and just a little more comfortable, without losing sight of sacred and symbolic values. Historians still argue how widespread these advanced ceramic techniques were. Were they limited to elite households, or did ordinary citizens also benefit? Archaeological evidence suggests variation between regions, social classes, and city sizes, but the debate continues because the technology itself leaves traces only in certain contexts. Whatever the answer, the ingenuity of water storage reflects a sophisticated understanding of materials, climate, and human needs. As the city moves toward evening, the Cenotes seems to acquire a different aura. Morning and midday brought labour, bustle, and practicality. Now its still surface reflects the softening sky, shifting clouds, and the silhouettes of platforms and temples. Pilgrims or families passing by may pause to admire the water, to leave a small token, or simply to watch ripples spread from an absent breeze. The cenote is both a functional well and a mirror, literally and metaphorically, of the city's daily life. Nearby, a pair of young men quietly discuss the coming harvest season, using the cenote as a meeting point. The conversation is mundane, but threaded with concern and strategy. This illustrates a key aspect of Maya urban design. Sacred and practical elements coexist, allowing for social, economic, and spiritual activity to unfold in the same space. The cenote anchors not only water collection, but discussion, negotiation, and communal decision-making. You observe another intriguing detail. Small aquatic plants, algae, and insects thrive in the cenote, forming a micro-ecosystem. Children may play at its edges, careful not to disturb its subtle balance, while adults navigate around or above it with practiced ease. The cenote is alive, in multiple dimensions, not just as a water source, but as a quiet living environment that supports humans and wildlife alike. Historians still argue whether ceremonial activities at cenotes disrupted these ecosystems significantly, or whether ancient Maya developed an early form of sustainable management, balancing ritual with ecological stability. Evidence suggests some areas were carefully maintained, with selective use and controlled offerings, while others were more casually treated, reflecting both spiritual and pragmatic approaches to the environment. By evening, the city seems to hum softly, as though acknowledging the cycles of work, ritual, and repose that define its existence. The cenote, cool and dark, remains at the centre of it all, a quiet guardian and sustainer. You walk back toward the plazas, feeling a gentle awe at the interconnectedness of every stone, every step, every water-filled jar, and every human action. Life in the city is an intricate web, with the cenote at its heart, linking daily labour, spiritual practice, and social cohesion, in ways both subtle and profound. Night approaches, and the city begins to settle into its softer rhythms. The heat of the day lingers in the stone platforms, releasing warmth slowly into the cooling air. Smoke from evening fires rises in delicate spirals, carrying the scent of cooking maize, roasted squash, and perhaps the occasional roasted fish or small game. Shadows stretch across the plazas, and the gentle hum of cicadas and forest insects rises to meet the fading chatter of children and the footsteps of returning labourers. It is a lull in the city's pulse, a transition from activity to reflection, from exertion to contemplation. The mainstream historical fact here is that Maya evenings were often marked by domestic and spiritual routines rather than intense labour. Families prepared food, cleaned cooking vessels, tended small household gardens, and participated in minor ceremonies or personal prayers. Ceremonial calendars also dictated times for offerings, and the cooling hours were ideal for reflection, storytelling, or quiet socialising. In essence, evenings balanced the physical demands of the day with mental, spiritual, and communal needs. Walking past a plaza, you notice the faint glow of lamps or torches illuminating ceremonial spaces. A few figures move deliberately, leaving small offerings or maintaining sacred altars near the cenote. Even ordinary households may perform brief rituals of thanks or remembrance. These moments are understated, almost intimate, yet they are a reminder that in the Maya city, the sacred and mundane are inseparable. The cenote's presence during these evening rites emphasizes the city's dependency on its water sources, not just for survival, but for the continuity of spiritual life. A quirky tidbit, some cenotes were believed to be portals to the underworld, where spirits and deities resided. Children may have been told stories about underwater guardians or talking fish to encourage respect and careful handling of water vessels. Adults, while skeptical, participated in these stories with playful acknowledgement, blending practical instruction with cultural narrative. It is charming to imagine families gathering near the water, reciting these tales as both warning and entertainment. Historians still argue about the extent to which mythological beliefs about cenotes influenced daily behaviour versus ceremonial life. Did ordinary citizens actively integrate these beliefs into every trip to the water, or was it primarily a ritualised occasional practice? Evidence points to both possibilities, suggesting a layered understanding where practicality, folklore and ritual intersected seamlessly. Near the cenote, small ripples disturb the water, created either by fish, falling leaves, or a faint evening breeze. The surface mirrors the sky, now deepening to purples and soft indigos, creating an almost meditative visual effect. This interplay between water and sky, between reflection and reality, may have encouraged both relaxation and contemplation, providing the city's inhabitants a visual and spiritual anchor at day's end. In the homes, people finish preparing evening meals, clay vessels are cleaned, woven mats arranged, and children tucked in near warm hearths. These domestic acts, though simple, sustain the entire city and its culture. Without careful attention to the basics, food preparation, water storage, household maintenance, the broader ceremonial or social life of the city could not flourish. The cenote once again is quietly central to all of it, providing the necessary water that supports domestic and spiritual continuity. A subtle human moment occurs when a young girl quietly drifts near the cenote, dipping her fingers in to test the water's temperature before returning to her home. Her reflection merges with the darkening sky, a poetic reminder of the constant presence and silent guidance of the city's watery heart. Even as night falls, she remains connected to this lifeblood, learning early that the rhythm of urban life is inseparable from the pulse of the cenote. Historians still argue whether evening rituals at cenotes were primarily individual, family-based or communal. Some evidence suggests smaller private offerings coexisted alongside larger ceremonial events, highlighting a flexibility in religious practice that accommodated both devotion and daily routine. Regardless, the Cenotes' symbolic and practical significance ensured its centrality in the lives of all citizens, from the youngest child to the oldest elder. As darkness deepens, the city's sounds mellow, the occasional bark of a dog, the rustle of leaves, the faint splash of water disturbed by a nocturnal animal, the soft murmur of evening conversation. Life slows, but does not stop. The cenote remains calm, steadfast and reflective, a silent guardian watching over the cycles of labour, play and ritual. Its presence is both reassuring and grounding, reminding the city that life continues, rhythmically and resiliently, with every rising sun and quiet nightfall.
Night deepens, and the city enters a state of gentle dormancy. The air cools as the sun slips behind the distant horizon, leaving behind a soft twilight glow that kisses the tops of the temples and terraces. The cicadas slow their song, and forest creatures begin their evening chorus. The cenote reflects this deepening twilight, its surface catching hints of moonlight that will soon dance across the water with a quiet, mesmerising rhythm. Everything feels suspended in a balance between rest and anticipation, a pause before the nocturnal activities of wildlife and ritual. The mainstream historical fact is that the Maya often structured evening and nighttime around reflection, storytelling, and preparation for the following day. While active labour ceased, domestic maintenance, preparation of ritual items, and personal or communal reflection continued. This pause in physical exertion allowed the community to maintain rhythm and mental well-being, aligning human activity with natural cycles and celestial observation. Even the placement of homes, plazas, and temples was designed to optimize evening comfort, airflow, and visibility, reflecting sophisticated urban planning. You wander near the cenote and notice the subtle, almost imperceptible signs of nighttime activity. Small offerings, perhaps seeds, feathers, or carved figurines, are placed delicately at the water's edge. Perhaps it is the work of priests or local families performing evening rites. You imagine a quiet conversation between siblings or neighbours about which tokens are most appropriate. Maybe even a light-hearted debate about whether a small clay bird is more persuasive than a leaf bundle in attracting divine favour. The city balances seriousness with a gentle playfulness that keeps life engaging even in the quiet hours. A quirky tidbit: some Maya believed that cenotes were gateways to other realms. Children were told that spirits might emerge at night to inspect offerings, while adults navigated this belief with both reverence and practical routine. In certain cases, this led to nocturnal vigilance or ritual dances near the water to honour unseen presences. The combination of awe, narrative and daily life created a living, breathing cityscape where even the night was imbued with meaning. Historians still argue about the extent to which nighttime rituals and beliefs about cenotes influenced ordinary behaviour. Were citizens genuinely fearful, reverent, or merely participatory in ceremonial observances? Evidence suggests a layered understanding, practical necessity, spiritual devotion, and social cohesion intertwined seamlessly in daily and nightly life. From the shadows near a temple platform, you see figures gathering quietly for a small, intimate ritual. The flicker of torches illuminates their faces, casting moving shadows across carved stones. Perhaps they are leaving symbolic offerings in the cenote, or engaging in whispered prayers. The activity is modest in scale but profound in intent, a microcosm of the broader urban and spiritual harmony that defines Maya city life. Even at night, the cenote functions as a central node, connecting human action with sacred belief and natural rhythms. The practical side of nocturnal life emerges as well. Households ensure water is stored safely, small fires are monitored, and children are settled. The cenote, although physically undisturbed by most nighttime activity, continues to influence domestic routines and urban planning. Its presence determines where paths are lit, where households are positioned, and how social and ceremonial gatherings unfold after dark. You reflect on the contrast between the quiet power of the cenote and the bustling intensity of daytime. During the day, it fuels labour, trade, and ritual. At night, it provides calm, reflection, and symbolic continuity. The dual role emphasises the genius of Maya design. The city revolves around water in ways that are simultaneously practical, spiritual, and psychological. Every action, mundane or sacred, is oriented around this steady, life-sustaining presence. A final whimsical note for the evening: occasionally, a frog or a small fish creates ripples across the cenote, seemingly responding to moonlight or the soft echoes of distant voices. This tiny disturbance reminds you that even in moments of stillness, life continues. The city, the water, the flora, and the fauna exist in subtle conversation, each responding to the other in patterns of cause, effect, and quiet playfulness. Historians still debate the extent to which these small nocturnal observations were noticed or valued by ancient Maya citizens, but there is little doubt that life, human and ecological, persisted in layered, interconnected ways. The cenote once again proves itself as the anchor around which both the practical and the mystical unfold.
Late night deepens, and a calm settles over the city. The air cools further, carrying the scent of damp earth, smoke from fading fires, and the delicate aroma of flowering plants that bloom in the moonlight. Stars begin to pierce the deep indigo sky, reflected faintly in the cenote's glassy surface. You notice the gentle rippling of water as a nocturnal breeze brushes across it. Every sound is hushed but distinct: the rustle of leaves, the distant call of an owl, the quiet drip of water from temple stones. The city's daytime energy has transformed into a subtle, almost meditative rhythm. The mainstream historical fact is that Maya urban planning accounted for nocturnal life as much as for the day. Pathways, plazas, and water sources were strategically placed to allow safe movement after sunset, while temples and ceremonial spaces often aligned with lunar cycles and particular constellations. This attention to celestial observation and urban design enabled the Maya to connect practical routines with spiritual and astronomical understanding. Even the cenotes were part of this nocturnal calculus. Their reflective surfaces mirrored the night sky, reinforcing symbolic connections between water and cosmos. You linger near the cenote and notice a solitary figure carefully adding a small offering to the water. The gesture is deliberate but quiet, almost intimate. Perhaps it is a seed wrapped in leaves, a tiny carved figurine, or a small vessel of water from a household reserve. The act is mundane in scale, but spiritually resonant, reflecting a personal devotion and recognition of the cenote's enduring significance. You imagine that even in the quietest hours, the city's sacred centre pulses with subtle human activity, a testament to centuries of tradition. A quirky tidbit: some Maya believed that the cenotes contained spirits that could guide dreams or inspire prophetic visions. Children might have been warned to approach the water respectfully at night, lest they disturb the spirits, while adults performed small gestures intended to maintain balance and harmony. The interplay of fear, respect, and curiosity kept the relationship with the cenote alive and dynamic, influencing behaviour even in private moments. Historians still argue about the degree to which these beliefs influenced daily versus ritualised behaviour. Were they fully internalised as guiding principles, or more performative, serving social cohesion and cultural identity? Evidence suggests both, as material culture, oral traditions, and ceremonial remnants indicate layered participation in symbolic practices. Nearby, you notice the faint glow of torches marking paths through the city. They illuminate carvings on temple walls, casting shadows that shift gently with the flickering flames. The cenote glows faintly under moonlight, reflecting these torches and creating a layered visual interplay that blends human activity, sacred symbolism, and natural beauty. It is both practical, for navigation, and symbolic, reinforcing the cenote's status as the city's anchor. You hear the soft sounds of nocturnal wildlife around the water, frogs croaking, insects buzzing, and small fish breaking the surface occasionally. These subtle cues remind you that the cenote is not just a human resource, but a thriving ecosystem, coexisting with the urban life around it. Maya citizens would have noticed these signs, integrating the rhythms of wildlife into their understanding of urban and sacred space. As you wander further, you observe households finishing the day's domestic routines, children tucked into mats, food stored carefully, fires extinguished or kept at safe levels, and jars of water returned to cool storage. The cenote remains central even in absence. Its water sustains households, its spiritual aura influences rituals, and its physical presence shapes how the city's infrastructure is used at night. A final whimsical thought drifts into your mind. Perhaps a small frog leaps into the cenote, sending ripples across the moonlit surface, as if offering its own tiny ceremony to the city. Even in these subtle moments, the cenote reminds you that life, both human and natural, is continuous, resilient, and intertwined. The Maya designed their city not only around survival and ritual, but also around the poetry of interconnected existence. Historians still debate whether these subtle nocturnal interactions were consciously recognised as part of urban planning or emerged organically through repeated human and ecological activity. Either way, the interplay of light, water and life continues to impress, demonstrating the enduring genius of Maya city design. As the night deepens further, the city becomes a tapestry of quiet movement and soft sound. The forest beyond murmurs with nocturnal life, owls hoot, bats flutter overhead, and small mammals rustle through undergrowth. Inside the city, the occasional footstep on stone paths echoes lightly, almost as if the stones themselves are whispering secrets from centuries past. The cenote, serene and reflective, acts as the heart of this nocturnal ecosystem, capturing moonlight and shadows while absorbing the subtle sounds and movements around it. Its presence is calming, anchoring both the physical and spiritual life of the city, even as most citizens rest. The mainstream historical fact here is that the Maya incorporated understanding of natural nocturnal cycles into their urban planning. Lighting, placement of temples, and access to water were carefully considered for both safety and ritual purposes. Temples and ceremonial platforms often aligned with lunar cycles or specific stars, emphasizing the city's cosmic awareness. These alignments weren't merely aesthetic, they integrated practical navigation, spiritual observation, and communal timekeeping, ensuring that even at night, citizens moved within a structured, meaningful urban environment. Near the cenote, a pair of young adults sits quietly, whispering about the day's labour, the next day's tasks, or perhaps sharing stories passed down through generations. Their words are soft, almost lost in the gentle night air, yet the act itself is significant. It reflects a communal approach to knowledge, where even casual conversation can reinforce cultural memory and social bonds. The Cenotes' presence as a meeting point enhances these subtle interactions, providing both a physical landmark and a spiritual backdrop. A quirky tidbit: some Maya citizens believed that nocturnal reflections in the cenote could predict dreams or signal omens. Imagine a small ripple across the water surface, being interpreted as a sign of good fortune, a call to caution, or a playful message from the divine. While we may smile at the idea, this gentle blending of observation, superstition, and ritual was a natural part of daily life, emphasizing mindfulness and attention to the surrounding world. Historians still debate how literally these interpretations were taken. Did ordinary citizens truly attribute meaning to every ripple and reflection, or were such beliefs more symbolic and ritualized, reserved for specific ceremonies or elite audiences? Evidence suggests both perspectives played a role, demonstrating the nuanced interplay between belief, observation, and social practice in Maya culture. Walking along the water's edge, you notice the soft sheen of moss on stones and the occasional flutter of leaves disturbed by a nocturnal breeze. The cenote ecosystem is alive with activity, fish skim the surface, insects hover and dart, and tiny amphibians hop from leaf to water. This living network underscores the duality of the cenote's function. It is simultaneously practical, providing essential water, and alive with symbolic, spiritual significance. You pause to imagine a scholar or scribe quietly sketching the cenote by torchlight, perhaps noting patterns in water movement or the positions of stars reflected in its surface. Even without formal scientific understanding, careful observation was a form of knowledge transmission, blending empirical attention with ritual and aesthetic sensibility. In this way, the cenote nurtured both survival and imagination, offering lessons in ecology, spirituality, and social cohesion. A final whimsical note: imagine the flicker of a torch reflecting in the water, multiplied into dozens of tiny points of light that seem to dance on the surface. For a moment, you feel that the cenote is not just a pool of water, but a portal to another dimension, a space where the living, the spiritual, and the natural world converge in gentle harmony. Even in the stillness of night, the city hums with life, learning, and quiet reverence. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal observations were routine or exceptional, yet it is clear that the cenote's presence guided human behaviour, domestic routines, and ritual activities long into the evening. Its influence pervaded daily life, embedding both practicality and poetry into the urban experience. As midnight settles, the city is wrapped in a profound, hushed stillness. The occasional footstep echoes through narrow stone corridors, yet most of the urban landscape rests under a delicate cloak of quiet. The cenote lies at the centre of this nocturnal calm, its dark waters reflecting the faint shimmer of stars overhead. The moon glides across the sky, illuminating temple facades, residential platforms, and ceremonial plazas in a soft silver glow. In this liminal hour, the city's past, present, and natural environment feel suspended in gentle equilibrium, each element resting yet alive with subtle motion. The mainstream historical fact is that the Maya often aligned important architectural and ceremonial structures with celestial events, including the position of the moon. Nighttime observations played a crucial role in their calendar systems, agricultural cycles, and ceremonial schedules. Certain temples and altars near cenotes may have been positioned to optimize moonlight visibility for specific rituals or to mark lunar phases critical to planting and harvesting. In essence, the city's design incorporated a continuous dialogue between human activity, celestial mechanics, and sacred geography. You notice faint figures, perhaps young apprentices or attentive elders, moving near ceremonial platforms. Their footsteps are careful, deliberate, almost as if they are not merely traversing space, but participating in a ritual of observation and mindfulness. Even informal or domestic nighttime tasks, like replenishing water jars, checking stored maize, or attending to small ceremonial offerings, carry an understated grace, emphasizing a culture attuned to rhythm, attention, and place. A quirky tidbit: certain cenotes were rumoured to host nocturnal spirits who guided dreams or offered cryptic messages to attentive citizens. Children were gently warned about mischievous water spirits, while adults integrated these ideas into storytelling, spiritual practice, or playful cautionary advice. It's easy to imagine a young person leaning over the cenote's edge, catching glimpses of fish, insects, or leaf ripples, and interpreting them as subtle messages from the otherworldly. In these nocturnal stories, imagination and observation intertwine seamlessly. Historians still argue whether these nocturnal beliefs influenced daily behaviour or remained largely ceremonial. Were citizens genuinely attuned to nocturnal omens, or were these practices symbolic, performed mainly for social cohesion and ritual continuity? The evidence suggests both interpretations have merit, reflecting the rich tapestry of Maya cultural life. You wander along the edge of the cenote, noting the interplay between moonlight and water, between reflected stars and shadows cast by temple walls. The cenote's surface seems almost alive, a mirror of both cosmic patterns and the city's collective energy. Its presence guides movement, thought, and even quiet meditation, reinforcing the sacred and practical duality that defines Maya urban design. The domestic sphere mirrors this nocturnal calm. Families rest near small hearths, water carefully stored, children safely tucked into mats. The cenote's influence permeates these simple acts, reminding citizens that life is sustained not merely through ritual or work, but through attention to the rhythms of water, earth, and celestial cycles. The city's heartbeat persists, gentle yet deliberate, anchored by its most sacred resource. A subtle, whimsical moment occurs as a small frog or fish disturbs the cenote's surface, sending ripples across moonlit reflections. The movement is quiet, yet noticeable, almost as if the water itself is participating in a slow nocturnal dance. Even in deep stillness, the cenote reminds the city's inhabitants, human and natural alike, of continuity, connection, and the persistent presence of life in all forms. Historians still debate how consciously nocturnal ecology and ritual were integrated into everyday practice. Some evidence suggests careful observation and mindful engagement with the environment, while other findings indicate that much activity emerged organically, guided by instinct, necessity, and tradition. Either way, the cenote's centrality is undeniable, grounding urban, spiritual, and ecological life in a single, enduring focal point. The final hours of night drape the city in profound stillness. The cenote, dark and reflective, lies like a quiet sentinel at the centre of urban life. Shadows from temple spires and residential platforms stretch across its surface, mingling with the faint glimmer of stars and the soft glow of the moon. Even the nocturnal animals seem to move with deliberation. Frogs croak intermittently, insects hum softly, and small mammals rustle in the surrounding forest. The air carries a gentle coolness, scented faintly with damp earth, flowering plants, and smoke from distant hearths still gently smouldering. In these hours, the Maya city feels alive yet perfectly at rest, as if it is breathing slowly alongside its inhabitants. The mainstream historical fact is that Maya city life, though bustling during the day, was carefully attuned to cycles of rest and observation at night. Celestial knowledge was not merely academic. It guided agricultural decisions, ceremonial timings, and even architectural alignments. Temples and altars near cenotes may have been designed to reflect moonlight in particular ways, illuminating sacred carvings or water surfaces during lunar phases. These alignments ensured that even in darkness, citizens were subtly guided by both cosmic and terrestrial rhythms, blending utility and ritual seamlessly. You notice quiet figures moving toward the cenote to perform small, intimate offerings, tiny bundles of flowers, seeds, or crafted trinkets. Each gesture is deliberate but unhurried, reflecting both devotion and care. Even the most mundane actions, refilling water jars, adjusting mats, checking hearths, carry a meditative quality in the soft, silvered light. The cenote serves as a focal point for these activities, anchoring domestic, ritual, and communal life in ways both subtle and profound. A quirky tidbit: some Maya believed that the water of Cenotes carried the dreams of those who slept nearby, flowing beneath the city as a conduit between the living and the spiritual. Imagine a child sleeping under a woven mat, while ripples in the cenote mirror their dream movements, creating a poetic sense of connection between human imagination and the natural world. These beliefs, whether literal or symbolic, fostered mindfulness and a deeper awareness of the rhythms around them. Historians still argue how widely such dream-related beliefs influenced actual behaviour. Were they largely symbolic, or did citizens consciously engage with cenotes to enhance sleep, reflection, or divination? Material and narrative evidence suggests a layered understanding where observation, ritual, and storytelling converged in daily practice, enriching social and spiritual life. The cenote itself remains central, physically and symbolically. It provides life-sustaining water, inspires stories and rituals, and mediates social interaction. Its presence during the deepest hours of night is a quiet reminder that life is continuous. Human, ecological, and spiritual rhythms persist, even when unseen. You imagine the faint ripples from a small nocturnal fish, or the gentle moonlight glinting across a mossy edge, both emphasizing the delicate balance between stillness and motion. A final whimsical moment, perhaps a firefly hovers briefly over the cenote's surface, its tiny glow reflected in the water. In that instant, it seems as though the city itself is breathing, blinking slowly in harmony with its inhabitants. The cenote, steadfast and enduring, holds this quiet magic in its depths, anchoring the Maya city across time, nature, and culture. Historians still debate the interplay between practical use, ceremonial practice, and ecological awareness in nighttime city life. Regardless of interpretation, it is clear that the cenote's role was central, both sustaining and inspiring. Life in the Maya city was profoundly intertwined with its sacred waters, a testament to human ingenuity, spirituality, and sensitivity to natural rhythms. Now, as the first hints of dawn stretch faintly across the horizon, allow yourself to sink fully into the quiet rhythm of the city. The cenote, still shimmering with moonlight's last whispers, feels like a gentle heartbeat beneath the stone platforms and temples. The cool, soft air carries the subtle sense of damp earth, flowering plants, and fading hearth smoke, reminding you that life continues quietly, steadily, without rush. You can almost hear the city exhaling after a long day. Every ripple in the water, every whisper of leaves in the trees, every tiny nocturnal movement, a part of the ongoing harmony. Imagine the water reflecting the softening sky, the stars fading gently as the sun's first light warms the stone surfaces. The Maya city remains calm, yet awake in its own way, ready to greet the day with measured purpose, guided by centuries of careful observation, ritual, and daily routine. Let your thoughts drift with this rhythm, feeling each inhale and exhale in sync with the city's quiet pulse. Even the smallest details, the faint rustle of leaves, the distant call of a bird, the gentle splash of water, contribute to this sense of interconnectedness. Picture yourself leaning back in a shaded corridor, listening to the soft murmur of life beginning anew. There is no need to hurry. Every motion, every breath, every ripple exists in perfect timing. The cenote's cool presence remains a grounding force, a reminder that water, life, and reflection are deeply intertwined. Allow this gentle imagery to settle in your mind, softening thoughts, slowing the pulse, and inviting relaxation. With each moment, the city fades into a comforting lull, and you drift further into calm. Let the gentle flow of water, the soft night air, and the serene balance of urban and natural life carry you toward rest.